Linden from Samson Burnham, well known as the master politician, and was an outstanding statesman. He was a great leader, and our hero, you understand. That's why we remember Edmund Burnham.
Yeah, morning viewers. Today I'm back with you on the fourth Sunday of January 2015. It's a new year, and I trust that I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone, all viewers of this program, half of the best. I'm going to keep the other half. So between us, we'll have the whole thing. So 2015 should be a successful and rewarding year. Today, before we get into our program seriously, I want to announce the death of Dr. Faith Harding, one of our colleagues in the struggle. And with me in the studio today, I have the chairman of the foundation, Mr. Vincent Alexander, and Mr. Aubrey Norton, former General Secretary and Member of Parliament. Mr. Alexander is also the chairman of the foundation. And I would, on behalf of the foundation, I would ask him to say something on behalf of Dr. Faith Harding.
Thank you very much, Clayton. Good morning to you viewers, and may I join with Clayton in wishing you all the best that you can have for 2015. This is the first program for the year, and unfortunately we have to start on this very sad note, the departure of someone who could be identified with the Burnham Foundation insofar as she was one who did a lot to implement some of the policies of Lyndon Fobbs Sampson Burnham. And I'm referring to Dr. Faith Harding, who passed last week. The Burnham Foundation takes the opportunity to extend its condolences to her bereaved husband, Patrick, her son, Patrick Jr., her sister Maureen, and all of her other relatives. Faith was indeed someone who can be identified with Burnham for a number of reasons. One, she was one of those persons who, having studied in the United States of America, found it the correct thing to return to Guyana to serve. So many Guyanese do not do that, and therefore she can be identified for her patriotism, returning home as highly qualified as she was to serve. Not only did she return home to serve, but in serve she indeed did, and Faith will be remembered for the way in which she transformed the lowest level of formal education. In the old days, we used to have kindergarten schools, largely in the private sector. Faith would be seen as the one who was responsible for taking the education policies of Lyndon Fobbs Sampson Burnham, the People's National Congress, and transforming that sector, that level of education, into a formal public sector engagement, and providing nursery education in a manner in Guyana that was never provided before. And so Faith would indeed be remembered for that, and it's good for us to bear that in mind, because so much may be said that would suggest that these things never happened. So today the Burnham Foundation joins in expressing its condolences on the bereavement, the passing of Faith Harding, and may her soul rest in peace.
Aubrey, would you like to?
May I also extend my sympathy and condolences to the family. I do agree with Vincent that Faith has made a significant contribution to Guyana. She was part of that group that actually put nursery education on the good footing that it was placed on. I think she has contributed in education, but probably the most significant recent thing she did was when Mr. Hoyt was launching the public service reform
program.
She was involved and played a critical role in terms of transforming the public service. One would recall that one of the planks that Mr. Hoyt was utilizing was that permanent secretaries should be independent professionals and not be political party type person, and in that process, Nigel Grayson and a number of people who were not political people became permanent secretary, and the process of transforming the public service into a professional body had begun under her watch. And I think that was significant, and she should be remembered for it. In more recent times, I think she became very well known for crisscrossing the country and trying to empower people of different groups, ages, and communities. You couldn't meet her recently without she talk about the Sorrel Project. And so I think, whatever people might think, she had a commitment to Guyana. She had a commitment to seeing poor people progress. She was a free spirit. It was a nice person to meet at a party. And so I think Guyana has lost one who has contributed significantly.
I want to say on behalf of the program and our engagement with the foundation to see how sorry we are at her passing, and trust that you, Patrick, would be able to nurture the strength to carry on. Faith has been a very outstanding person to Guyana. I want to also add at this point, of course we'll be opening the lines later on in the program, but before we go into what we'll be addressing today, I want to announce a few things that will be happening during the course of the month of February, which is the birth month of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Every year we organize, that is the Burnham Foundation, we organize a number of activities to kind of commemorate his birth. And first among those activities, say for this year, will be on the 15th of February. On the 15th of February, we'll be having a church service at his church, that is at the Kitty Methodist Church. The public is invited to attend that church service. It's in the morning at 7:30. At 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8 in the morning, that church service will be held at Kitty Methodist Church. You know, that is the church that Forbes Burnham attended. His father was also a preacher in that church. On the 20th, we'll be having a symposium and the ceremonial opening of our annual conference. Let me go that again. On the 20th of February, we'll be having a symposium, which will be held at Critchlow Labour College, and the ceremonial opening of our annual conference. That is on the 20th. On the 21st, we will have the business session of the conference. And on the 22nd, every year we conduct a cycle race. On the 22nd, we'll be having that cycle race. It is from Caracara up at Linden to Georgetown, and from Georgetown up to Belfield and back. That race will be held on the 22nd of February. We also would like to announce from today will be our first in a series of programs that we have planned. A series of programs to contextualize Burnham's politics in Guyana. Let me go that again. The series will focus on contextualizing Burnham politics in Guyana. And today will be the first of those programs. The first, let me repeat, contextualizing Burnham politics in Guyana. And today is the first of those programs. These two gentlemen in the studio with me today, Mr. Vincent Alexander and Aubrey Norton, former General Secretary of the party, will be addressing the first of the series. And we will be looking primarily today at a specific period. Burnham as a student, his entry, his student activities in politics, and his return to Guyana and involvement in politics. I don't know which of the two gentlemen would like to go first, but Vincent, I want to perhaps invite you to perhaps take the first pick.
Thank you very much, Clayton. The Burnham Foundation has found it necessary and prudent to embark on this series so that there could be a clear and unequivocal understanding of Burnham's involvement in politics and the context in which he was involved, because ever so often there are bland comments and statements made about Burnham without any reference to the conditions, the circumstances in which he practiced his politics. And so the foundations found it necessary to try to give a context to Burnham for the entire period of his involvement in politics. We, however, wish to start today's series starting from his student activism onto the period of the split of the PPP. And we started this activism because one can start to glean from Burnham's involvement in London as a student, his ability as a potential leader and politician, his qualities, his leadership qualities, which became manifest through his involvement in the student movement in London. In fact, when one talks about London and Burnham, one has to speak on one hand about his involvement in the student movement. On the other hand, one has to speak about his involvement in the wider political movement, because there was some association at that time of Burnham and the Communist Party of Britain. So one could see from those very early days not only his leadership qualities, but his inclination in terms of his left-leaning, based on his involvement in the work of the Communist Party in
London.
And even his involvement in the West Indies Student Society, a society which eventually he represented, if I'm not mistaken, at the Festival of Youth and Students in Czechoslovakia, as one of the first Guyanese to have gone to such a conference. Not a conference, in fact, a festival of youth and students, which really brought together the youths and students of the progressive world over a period up to the late 90s. I think this festival continued to be held. So the first point that we want to make about Burnham was one, that his era of studentship allowed for manifestation of his qualities as a potential leader. It also gave him an orientation by virtue of an involvement in the student movement and in the left-wing movement in London, and also gave an indication of his own political thinking and direction, even from that early period in his life.
Aubrey, you want to
Well,
comment on
I think
Burnham's
in
orientation?
understanding Burnham, one has to understand that Burnham was leaving a colony in which the status quo was colonial authorities, and you had below the Guyanese. And therefore, Burnham would have left Guyana when opportunities were scarce, saw what was happening in England, and joined the political movement in England. In the political movement, I think a number of things happened. First, he came into contact with the whole spectrum of people on the left, the socialists, the communists, whatever. And it does appear to me, from both discussions with Burnham, listening to him, and my own reading, that Burnham was turning over in his head his ideological position. And he, while he was part of the Communist Party in London, he was also interacting with ideas from the Socialist International, and there's documentation to suggest that. So I think Burnham did not start as a communist. It appears to me, as a student, he was searching for an ideological direction and an understanding of the politics. Now, having said that, Vincent made the point that he went to the World Festival of Democratic, the World Festival of Youth and Students, sponsored by the World Federation of Democratic Youth, WFD. And clearly, at that conference, he interacted with the students and started to crystallize his position. More importantly, he was studying at a time when the colonial world was sending a lot of students to the United Kingdom to study. So at that time, you would have had Manley, Norman, Michael, I might have been.
Michael Manley.
Norman was at home as the thing. Michael Manley. I don't remember if surely if Barrow was there, but I know Kenneth Kaunda was there. So they were African Caribbean leaders in.
I think Nyerere made also.
Nyerere was there as well. But the point is, it does appear to me the interaction of these potential leaders, because at the time they were
not
potential
leaders.
leaders, gave you an indication of what was emerging with Burnham ideologically. And to the extent that Kaunda and Nyerere became his close friends, there's something characteristic about them. While they interacted with Marxism and interacted with communism, all three of them believed that whatever brand they produced had to have a local dimension. So that in Tanzania, it was the Arusha Declaration that produced.
Arusha, right.
I don't remember the name. Vincent will be more familiar with that than me. But what, in essence, it was a Tanzanian brand of socialism. Kenneth Kaunda is the same thing. And by the time Burnham came down on the side of cooperative socialism, you'll ask, what is the importance of this? The importance of this is to draw the distinction between him and those who went to the Communist International. They accepted lock, stock, and barrel what Moscow was saying and doing, and didn't attempt to analyze the ideology, extrapolate from it, and internalize it in the local situation. I think that put Burnham a chip above those who ended up being what you call pro-Soviet or pro-something. It also will explain later why Burnham ended up in the non-aligned movement, because Burnham clearly felt that you had to get rid of domination, and that it didn't matter which state was dominating. The question was, people needed to be free, independent. And I believe the interactions at the ideological level, in large measure as a student, defined Burnham's thinking later down.
Well, Burnham came back and got involved. His exposure there, the Communist International and the various potential leaders, Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, and those other people who he met there, Errol Barrow. I don't know if Dr. Williams was there.
Yes, Eric Williams was in
I,
England at the time.
but I think that, as you said, influenced him. His return, Burnham's return and involvement in politics in Guyana.
I think it's important, even as one talks about Burnham, and Aubrey would have referred to this indirectly, in contextualizing Burnham, to look at the broader political landscape at the time. And I think the point that Aubrey was making points clearly to Burnham's early orientation, differentiating him from Dr. J. Gunn, who would have become a communist, lock, stock, and barrel. And the fact that the evolution of these two gentlemen impacted significantly on what was to come in Guyana. And here is where contextualization becomes very, very important and critical. Because the groundings that Aubrey referred to certainly would have been groundings that made Burnham ideologically different from J. Gunn, notwithstanding the fact that they both came together and joined the same party and formed the same party. And what should be recognized that in the formation of that party, in fact, J. Gunn was home before Burnham, had formed the PAC, and was looking towards a formation of political party that would reflect the nation, reflect the Guyanese people. And in that regard, it was important for him to embrace someone who could represent an African presence in the party, a significant African presence. It is said that in the first instance, the thought was that Ashton Chase should have been that person. Ashton Chase apparently declined. But Burnham was then recommended, not only by locals, but by some of the same people with whom he had rubbed shoulders in London. They recommended that here was a young, brilliant lawyer who had exhibited leadership skills, who was returning home and therefore would be an appropriate person to be involved in the national movement for independence. And therefore Burnham, in fact, came home knowing that he was coming to be involved in the formation of that political party, which we would see would then be at the center of politics in the country. And in preparation for that, didn't come directly to Guyana. He went first of all to Jamaica, where he was involved in some exposure to the People's National Party of Jamaica under the leadership of Norman Manley, and to get some inclination of how these parties operate, how that party was operating. And of course, if you know Manley, you would know that the orientation there too was not a communist orientation, but a progressive socialist orientation. So we see Burnham transitioning from being a student through Jamaica, going to get some orientations about the study and about what's happening, then coming back home into the movement, and came home and immediately joined with Jagan to form the People's Progressive Party. I think an important point that we need to make, even at this juncture, was that at that time, in the formation of that party, there was never the identification of a post called a leader. There were essentially two offices that featured the General Secretary and the Chairman. And one may well argue that it is Jagan's disposition towards communism that prevailed, insofar as in some circles he was seen as the leader of the party, because in the communist circles it's the General Secretary who is the leader, and we still have that with the PEP today. There's no person called a leader. So we've seen from the very inception how the difference of orientation even informed the difference of structures that have emerged and the difference of attitudes towards government and governance in Guyana. And that is why this question of contextualization is so important, because it gives us a deep and concrete understanding of how these personalities, and in this instance Burnham as a personality, impacted the politics, and from what perspective he was impacting the politics. So essentially, when Burnham joined the PPP, though to a very large extent the party was identified with communism and all of that, Burnham was clearly not a communist, and for all intents and purposes was a nationalist, as one may say Cheney was also, but not only a nationalist, but one who was inclined towards something more indigenous. It turned out eventually to be cooperative socialism. And Aubrey made the point, you can see the similarity between Kaunda of Uganda, of Zambia, who also went back home and engaged in leftist politics, but not communism. And Nyerere of Tanzania, who went home and as well got involved in leftist politics, and was the founder of the of Ujamaa. So we see here emerging from London three leaders, Burnham being one, who clearly, by the time they would have left London, had formulated in their mind an indigenous approach to politics, and in fact an indigenous ideology for all intents and purposes. And that's the Burnham that joined the PPP. And knowing that that's the Burnham that joined the PPP, one can now understand what evolved in the PPP from then until the time of the split. I think it's important to mention the party was formed in 1950.
First of January
1950. As early as 1951. there is now information that suggests that Chetty Jagan was moving the party in the direction of the Communist International. There's evidence to suggest that. Not only was he moving the party in that direction, but although the party was supposed to be nationalist, he clearly had in mind a domination of his left, the communists, over the party. And so, in recent disclosures from the Woodrow Wilson Center of material in the Czechoslovakian archives, there's a letter where Chetty's writing to the Czechs, the communists in Czechoslovakia. And the important element of that letter, which I want to refer to, is Jagan saying to them at that time that in his party, the left wing are in control. So Jagan, notwithstanding what he may have been saying here at home, is disclosing to the Communist International, and an element of that international, the Czech Communist Party, that here I am, a communist, seeking your collaboration. And I'm seeking your collaboration from a position of strength, because my wing of the party
Is in control.
is in control. And so we need to register this as a very important moment, because as early as 1951, there is information to suggest that direction that Chetty Jagan was taking, and identifying that there were wings in the party. Obviously, Burnham was not of that left wing because of the orientation which we talked about earlier. And as we go on with this series, one will see indeed Burnham was not of that left wing. And therefore one would see that the intention of Jagan from the very inception was, one, to have that left wing dominate the party, and two, to have the party aligned to the communist movement.
International.
And this is so important to understand what evolved in Guyana over time. For example, if we fast forward a bit to 1953, it has always been a big question as to why the British did what they did in 1953. Why, after a popular government had been put in place, that they dissolved the parliament, suspended the constitution, brought troops into the country, and put an interim government in place. One said, why is this? This government was popularly elected. Now, I'm not arguing the British were right, but I'm making this point. That the British must have known of the direction in which Burnham, in which Jagan wanted to take his party and the country. They must have had intelligence that allowed them to know what he was doing. And in 53, when they came into government, some of the manifestations may have concretized what their intelligence was saying. The way in which the then government went to Parliament attired in white suits and red ties, and the leftist rhetoric that emanated from the Jagans and the Carters. You could imagine what was happening in the halls in London. And so, though one should continue to argue the British were not right to suspend the Constitution, one can now start to rationalize something which prior to now we didn't clearly understand, and which the British probably understood because of Jagan's early involvement with the communists. And given what was happening in the world, the whole question of the Cold War and the struggle for dominance between the East and the West, Jagan had taken Guyana to a place other than to struggle for independence. He'd taken to Guyana straight into a Cold War, which would eventually affect all that would happen in Guyana thereafter.
Well, I would continue with Vincent's stuff. I put it slightly different.
Just before you go, Aubrey, I just want to tell our viewers, I will open the line in another few minutes, but students of political science at the University of Guyana, I think this might be a very interesting program for you to make some notes. You may go ahead, Aubrey.
I think what Vincent has brought out is that essentially in that period, Guyana had two political leaders emerging. One was pragmatic, and the other one lacked pragmatism. Burnham is very pragmatic. He sought to analyze the local situation and formulate strategies and approaches based on it. Dr. Jagan, on the other hand, had taken an ideological position and followed the direction of that ideological position, which caused him to lose sight of the reality here. I think additionally, there's a significant difference between the Jagans, Kenneth Kaunda, Burnham, Kenneth Kaunda, Nariri, Manley, and the Jagans. Dr. Jagan had studied in the US, and he had studied dentistry. There is no evidence that he came into contact with the concept of the rule of law in a way in which Burnham, they were in contact with it. And even when you look at the evolution of the PPP today, you see a distinction between those who studied communism without studying rule of law. What in fact you have from them are a group of people who pay no interest in law and believe that they should do what they like. And again, if you go back now, here was Burnham, a lawyer, with a clear understanding of the rule of law and being prepared to act cognizant of the fact that it was a British colony operating under these laws. And this is significant because it will explain the mentality of the PPP stream that comes from what I call the ideological hawk section of the party, and the likes of Ramkaran, Ramjatan, who, and later Moses, who interacted, developed an understanding of the rule of law, and in some regard became antithetical to the communist dogma. Now, one has to recognize that Burnham was a socialist and a lawyer, and therefore a number of factors were intervening. The tendency of the PPP and others during this period is to paint Burnham as a man who wanted power. And the only variable acting is this thirst of power. In fact, recently I had to deal with Paul Tennessee and Pippin Tom on this issue, showing them that the context in which Burnham operated determined far more than Burnham's individual position. But I want to make this point. I think the Guyanese need to recognize that there is hardly any politician who goes into politics without power in mind. I mean, if you are going to become a politician, you obviously are saying, first, I want to see the party I am in power. I want to see my country powerful. And I want to be able, even at what level, to exercise power to influence the ideas in the party. And I'm saying this because I believe that one of the things that is missed in the 1950 to 55 period is that Burnham and Jagan were operating in a party. There was a contest of ideas. There was no doubt of Burnham's intellectual superiority over Jagan. I think even if you wake up Jagan, he will agree that Burnham was intellectually superior to him. Now, having had that, here is Dr. Jagan as General Secretary, Burnham as Chairman, and you discussing. Clearly, Burnham would have swayed the audience because of his intellectual and oratory skills, and therefore was emerging as a significant leader in the PPP. Dr. Jagan was there as leader, not showing the level of intellectual capacity, and therefore was under challenge. And let us not make any thing about it. Political leaders will always be under challenge. Once you have in the political framework people who are thinking, analyzing, and have different views, that will happen. And I make this point because there is this dangerous tendency to suggest that everything Burnham did was about him getting power. As we go down, I will show clear evidence that a lot of it was Dr. Jagan seeking to hold on to power.
I think Aubrey's made a very, very fundamental point there. And the fact that, as has been clearly established, that the Burnham and Jagan were not necessarily ideologically of the same thinking. It was a struggle in relation to the dominance of ideas. Whose idea would prevail? That Jagan said to the Czechs in 51, my left wing is dominating, showed that he clearly understood that there would be this struggle. And if Burnham had a different set of ideas, then obviously there was a contest of ideas. And a contest of ideas has to be manifest in a contest between people. And therefore, in the party, there would have been, probably in the first instance, not so obvious and not so open, contest between Burnham and Jagan because of the difference of ideas. And that contest had to manifest itself in being positioned so that one's ideas could prevail, because that is what one would want to prevail, one's ideas. As Jagan clearly said, my left wing is in control. And Burnham, obviously, with his ideas, would have wanted his whichever wing to be in control. And there's another issue there as well, is that at that point in time, given where Guyana itself was at, shouldn't they have suppressed the ideological differences in forging a struggle for independence? The answer to that would be yes. But the difficulty that would have arisen is that Jagan seemed not to have understood the need for that. As we go through these series, one would see that Burnham in some regard suppressed it. Though he wasn't communist, he suppressed his level of left-wing politics because he recognized that what one had to do first of all was to get independence. So we'll come back to see that later in the series. But the other point I want to make, and a point that Aubrey made, but to make it slightly different, Aubrey argues the point that Jagan had no exposure to the rule of law. There is a fundamental difference between people who are liberal Democrats and people who are engaged in democratic centralism on the question of the rule of law. In fact, the question of the rule of law does not arise in democratic centralism. The question of separation of powers does not arise in democratic centralism. So let's look at what arises. Under the person who's a liberal Democrat would be engaged in separation of powers, which is what we're supposed to have according to our Constitution. The person who's a liberal Democrat would be engaged in the rule of law, which says that the law, as passed by the legislature, is the fundamental law that is applicable to everyone in the country in a manner that is equal. On the other hand, one who is engaged in democratic centralism does not recognize the rule of law and recognizes something called socialist legality, which is founded not on the state per se, but on the party, and in which system the citizens of the party are considered to be superior to decisions of the legislature and the state. And though we have mountains in Guyana about separation of powers and the rule of law and all of that, the practice suggests that they are in fact informed by democratic centralism, and therefore there's no recognition for two things that are fundamental to democratic state: the rule of law on one hand, and separation of powers on the other hand. And so one can start to see now the context of Burnham's politics, the way in which he dealt with the issue of law and the rule of law, and the way in which he dealt with the issue of the separation of powers, matters to which we will come to later on in the era where these things are more manifest.
Yes, I want to tell our viewers that we are Contextualizing the politics of Forbes Burnham. Because of the inaccurate comments and statements and things that have been written about him, we're trying to correct these issues. Student of political science, these programs, this is the first in a series. You should take note. And I am now opening the lines, and
Before
I
you
will
open the
invite
line, I want-
Aubrey to make his point right now.
I want to make one quick point. We have said all that has happened, and we have underscored that there were ideological differences, there were differences in the in the leaders. But I want to make this point, that those differences have got to be taken in the context that Burnham was African Guyanese and Dr. Jagan was Indo-Guyanese. In another society in which race didn't play a critical role, those differences might have stayed as political and ideological differences. But to the extent that you have two leaders from two different ethnic groups, those differences took on an ethnic dimension. And that ethnic dimension, I believe, was critical in the accentuations of the divisions in the Guyanese society. I wanted to make that point before.
I agree to Aubrey's point, but I think we need to make the other point to reinforce the origins of the difference
Correct.
as ideological.
Yeah.
And that is manifest in the split in the party. Because when the split occurred, no one can argue the split occurred at the level of the party and its central executive along racial
Racial
lines.
lines.
Because one could see clearly that going with Shady Jagan were people like Carter, Guyana, and Westmus, who were not Indo-Guyanese. And going with Burnham also were Indo-Guyanese. So that the split at that time was clearly along lines of ideology.
Yeah.
But given that Burnham was an Afro-Guyanese, and given that Jagan was an Indo-Guyanese, there were manifestations of differences in the society that did not take on any ideological connotation and would have taken on ethnic connotation. Because it is argued even to today that when one looks at the endeavors of Indo-Guyanese, that they don't seem to be naturally inclined towards communism, but they were naturally inclined towards Jagan. And so it could not be ideology that led to the division way down to the bottom. That there had to be another factor, and that we will speak about again as we come to another phase of
Yes.
this series.
Okay, like I said, we will be having this series. This is the first of its kind, and we'll be contextualizing the politics of Forbes Burnham while he was alive. And with me today is Mr. Aubrey Norton and Vincent Alexander. This is the first, where the lines are now open. I want to invite you viewers, those of you who have been looking at this program so far, you can call in, make your comments, ask your questions if you need to perhaps expound on anything that was said. And I would like to encourage students of political science, if you at home you're listening to this program, you should be able to take some notes and see what you can do with this kind of information that's come. This is part of our role in this program, is not this. This is part of our program, a part of our role in this program to make sure that information is given to our young people in relation to our past leaders. And in this case, the Forbes Burnham Foundation is doing exactly that. Aubrey, you were saying something.
Well, I wasn't saying anything. No, but I think we have got to recognize that problems in society are not unidimensional. They have many dimensions. And one of the
Black
things
call
we're
coming
seeking to... Well, go ahead if the call is coming.
Yes, call you on here.
Good morning, Mr. Norton,
Morning, sir.
Senior, Mr. Vincent Alexander, and yours truly.
Morning.
Yes.
First thing, I must say Happy New Year to each one of you, and wish each one of you the best for the new year, and also Guyana. Very good topic, a topic of interest. I'm saying this to you, is really hear these positive things about situations in what was the past. We're only hearing about what they do. But we don't want to go down back the drain on what they do or what we do. The problem is that you are trying to let people know who Burnham was, what he stands for, things we need us as Guyanese was to achieve. What I'm saying to you, we want these things more often. We wanted to want, I mean, more often. Because let me tell you something. I like to look at this program, you know. Sometimes get dialogue with certain people, they don't know nothing. When you ask them something, they know. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying to you, we know that it's a hard task, especially if you get into people's homes, to look at these things and understand. But no, you have a lot of work to do, and you just keep doing your good work. I'm asking you all, as seniors, let the persons or persons who are listening understand that life is not about you or me, but all of us. And whatsoever you are talking there is something where education is concerned. We could understand that Burnham stood for X, Burnham stood for Y. Okay?
Yeah.
Very good topic, and I want you to hold it up and keep strong. Because I will look at this book, but I feel that once a month or 2 times a month is not enough. I mean, it's expensive. We need contribution. If I could contribute a million and a half, is a 2,000 or 3,000 towards the program, I mean, another million here. I would do it on behalf of me and my family.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Vincent.
Yes, well, we're going to take the caller up on that aspect of contributions. We ourselves, we're going into our program in period in February, and may come out of that saying that we have to move from one program a month to 2 a month, and of course that will have financial implications. And caller, you hear from us in that regard.
Morning, you're on the air.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, sir.
Thank you for this kind of education, you know, especially at around this time of mudslinging and things like that, you know. I wish some of those innocent minds wouldn't be caught up in the Rodney
The Commission of Inquiry.
you know, would get some of this into their system so they can purge themselves of most of the ignorance that, you know, that they're being fed with and historical.
Purge themselves of the bile against Forbes Burnham.
Right. I see. What you said about the PPP never, you know, was aligned with the rule of law, I think is very true. They were more aligned with the Apanjat caste system rule of law, you know, because they're always so convenient. They had the bashing of Burnham Constitution. Now they're hanging in with it as the best thing in the world, and without putting forward their own. They never had one. They fly all over the world to condemn it. Because rule of law is not them. For them to sit down and really put rule of law is contrary to their nature. You know.
All right.
That is why they had even mentioned at one time. They keep mentioning that they were thrown out in '64 when they lost the election. And today, if you take note, they're setting up a scenario for the same thing. That is why they use this school date. Seeing that the ABC and everybody's calling on them, you know, churches, local NGO calling on them to do the right thing. That is why they're setting up this May the 11th date to cause confusion. So that they themselves might burn down to school or something and say it's PVP, and they were thrown out again by the ABC country and the local opposition. That is why you see they're building up to. They want the confusion to harp from now. You got to know they're going now. They know the positive they're going now.
All right, thank you.
Keep the harp for another 28 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for calling.
I think an important point to note during this period, we start to establish that whilst the propaganda has over the years pointed to American involvement in Guyana, that what is now coming to the fore is that all of the world has been involved in Guyana all the time, and that the PPP was also in touch and got support and assistance from other sources. Unfortunately, the way the world has
Morning, on
operated-
here.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Mr. Norton and others on the
Good morning.
I'm a very young person listening to this. It's very much edifying to me because lots of things that y'all are talking about, I have no idea. Gone in the past. So it's very good for me to know and to hear about these things so that I can pass on to younger people and people of the
Yes, we hope you do that.
I never went too far in school, but it's a kind of schooling for me right now.
All right.
Guyana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, the point I was making is that we're coming to see now from evidence that's emerging that Guyana was certainly caught up in the Cold War, and that this attempt to suggest that you had Western interference and Western interference alone is not true, and that in fact the East was equally involved in what was happening in Guyana through the PPP. And so to attempt to cast someone as a villain and someone else as the innocent is a misrepresentation of the realities in the 50s, because we're seeing now clearly that from the very inception, Jagan called on the East for material support, and as we go along we will disclose
Including military.
more of this. And that support was
Morning,
not
you're on
just
the air.
financial.
Good morning, Dr. Norton and members of the panel there. Very, very, very informative program. I hope that these programs would be captured on DVD so that the young generation would be informed about the Caribbean man of the century and his legacy would not fall by the wayside. Thank you, gentlemen, a million for this valiant effort. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes.
Right? So we have to see Guyana and Burnham in the context of the Cold War, in the context where the PPP more than anyone else, and Jagan in particular with his left wing, had dragged Guyana into the Cold War at a time where it was not even independent. And that's an important point to note, that Jagan was not very strategic in his politics. He advanced us into a level of struggle that was going to negate the level we were really at in terms of what we wanted to achieve. And this negation started in '53, when the British came in and suspended our constitution.
In fact, Burnham said that a socialist colony is a contradiction. You must first try and get independence, then you can talk about any ideological direction. Whereas Dr. Jagan, and I saw Paul Tennessee try to suggest that when you maintain a position consistently, even if it's a stupid position, that you are sincere, and that if you change your position, you are opportunist. In fact, I've responded to that, and to point out that leaders change based on the situation. I even asked the question, how is it could Tennessee say that Burnham is opportunist because he changed, but Dr. Jagan was going pro Soviet Union all the time, and the first time he saw the chance of getting power in 1992, he quoted the US, but Tennessee didn't say Dr. Jagan was opportunist. You see, and that's one of the problems.
Morning, you're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Wonderful program. I'm enjoying it. I'm 43 now, and when I was a young lady, I remember Burnham would
Just
come
speak a
around.
little louder, please.
Yes, I'm 43 now.
Okay.
When I was a little girl, I remember Burnham would come around on his horse with his purple suit and stuff, and he would throw like cassava sticks and encourage us to farm and different things. And it's so hard. It's so hard to see now that, okay, I would have known of some things. Like the first time I went to Trinidad and I was looking for Sandy light orange juice, and there wasn't any. And I started reading the labels, and then I found out that everything was made in Trinidad and Tobago, and it struck me that, you know what, this is what Burnham was trying to do, to make us self-sufficient. But now what this government is doing is to make the young people to believe that Burnham was doing nothing for this country, and everything now it's all about them, like grow more food and all that. We had all those things back in the days, and even this big pig farm or whatever they're trying to, I don't know what's the name of it. I know about us producing bacon and ham and pork, sausage and all of that, But anyhow, please continue to do
At
this.
farm, there was a ham and bacon factory at farm.
Yeah, you see, the whole idea of
I
these
think
programs
they
that
would
we
be
have, in
sold
fact,
to
there's a
someone that
specific kind of series that we have started, say, for today, where we're contextualizing the politics of Burnham. But we are aware, and that's part of our role, to educate people in terms of the politics, especially our young people. the politics of Forbes and what his contribution was towards the people of
Not
Guyana.
cutting you, one other point. I remember the other day when they had a problem with the buses, and the government said that they will give the big buses for free. So this client of mine said, wow, girl, how you like the government giving big buses? I said, you don't know about that? I said, in my days, we had the Tata buses. We had big buses, too. I'll show you where one of the bus stops are when you come by me in my area. I said that we also used to get free uniform that we, the school children, used to call it Burnham bedding. Remember that from textiles?
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
But you
All right,
see,
thanks
on
for
the
calling.
bus thing, it is critical to remember that what was happening on the Burnham in terms of the bus was the state running the bus. What the PPP was attempting to do was to give a few of their cronies money
To provide a service.
to provide a service, which, you know,
That is quite true.
you know.
Morning, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
I would like very much for this election coming up that they have the transparent boxes and no wood boxes a long time ago. They want transparent boxes.
Okay.
Put them in glass boxes. Let me see what going in and coming out.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
There is a slight danger in the transparent box. You have got to be very careful when you're talking about the box, because taking PPP communities, if they could see what's going in the box, they will deal with those people who vote against them. So while your proposal might sound good, there's a dimension that we have to give further consideration to. I believe we need to scrutinize the election more. Wooden boxes, so the people in PPP areas who want to vote against the government can do so and not believe that the PPP is seeing what they're doing. So while your idea might sound good, it has some dangers for a lot of people who live in PPP communities.
Morning, you're on the air.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, sir.
I would like to say, because Mr. Burnham was a liar, he did everything with careful consideration.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening today?
Just a little louder, please.
Yes, I would like to say that Burnham did everything with careful consideration because he was a liar. And because he had, the next thing, he had care for what his vision was.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we are seeing people who, as you pointed out earlier, don't have any care for anything because they don't observe the rule of law. One of the things I would ask you to preach is loyalty. Because at the school level, they're not teaching it. So people in this country is not loyal or are not loyal. The next worrying point, these people talk about development and they take our milk plan. Take we milk plan and make it into a water factory. I want y'all announce these things so people know what's happening.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling. I've just been given the signal because our time has run out, but I want to assure our viewers that I want to remind you before I go to that we will be having our church service, or we are observing the February activity to commemorate the birth anniversary of Lyndon Forbes Samson Burnham. On the 15th of February at Kitty Methodist Church, we'll be having a church service. Then we have a symposium and the ceremonial opening of our conference. On the 20th, the 21st is the business session of the conference. And on the 22nd, we're having the cycle race. Today has been the first in the series of contextualizing the politics of Forbes Burnham. Today with me, I had Mr. Aubrey Norton and Vincent Alexander. Just before we go, your final comments, Aubrey.
Well, I was pleased to be here, and I am always disposed to discussing Burnham and giving elements of Burnham life. I don't believe Burnham was a priest and did everything correct, but I do believe that Forbes Burnham was a nationalist who contributed significantly to Guyana notwithstanding what the errors that he would have made, and therefore I oppose the attempt to, by the PPP, to really make Burnham into a demon and Dr. Jagan into a priest.
Vincent.
I think the important thing of this morning's program is that we've been able to establish that there were, from the inception, fundamental differences between Burnham and Jacob. That they came together in what was essentially a nationalist movement, but that the politics of Jacob and his emphasis on relationships with the East and the communist ideology was ahead of the struggle and may have been the reason for the casualty that led to the split in the party. The split in the party was essentially one based on ideology, but because of the ethnic nature of society, it took on ethnic dimensions in terms of the wider society.
Okay, I want to thank our viewers for allowing me in your homes, your bedroom, your living rooms, your kitchen. And I want to say that tune in again on the 4th Sunday in February when the Forbes Burnham Foundation bring to you another program, The State of the Nation. My name is Clayton Hinds, and I want to thank you for being here with me today.